Hey everybody, Wayne here. In today's overview and review, we're going to take a look at Battle of the Bulge 1944, designed by Dan Fournie and published by Worthington. Before I dive in, I do want to thank Worthington for providing me with this review copy to show off to you guys. And even more importantly, I want to thank all of you who have been amazing. You're watching my videos, you're giving me thumbs up, subscribing, commenting especially. Love the comments. I just appreciate all of you. And if you especially, I also appreciate the people who are signed up for my Patreon. You can check that. It'll be in the link in the comments and then a link in the video as well. It's just a way to donate to the channel. I am provided with some review copies, but I also buy quite a bit of my own games. And sometimes I buy games just to show them off on the channel. I usually, have fun with them, of course. And I'll let you guys know if I don't. You've seen it before. But I do appreciate all the support. So, all right, enough of that. Let's dive in here. So we have Battle of the Bulge 1944. This is, as you can see, a hex encounter game. It is either two-player or soloable. I'll go into that in depth a little bit later, but basically there is the possibility of hidden information that you can use, like a fog of war. You can use markers, hidden markers. You can know all these different things that'll allow the game to kind of excel as two-player. Or if you can remove those, it doesn't really seem to impact the game having them out of there. I haven't played with them because I've only played at solitaire. This channel focuses on solitaire games, but the game has played very well solitaire, just so you guys know. So it is definitely solo playable. It uses the hold fast rules, or at least a variation of the hold fast rules. For those familiar with that, you'll understand this. You can probably skip right towards the end of my video here, my review. Otherwise, what that means is that in most of the holdfast games, I believe, use blocks. This one does use counters, but it still works very well. What it is that you're going to have resource points. Each side will have a certain amount of resource points. Generally, in this game, you're looking at the Germans start with 20, which is the max. The Allies only start with 6, and then they start building up, and the Germans start losing them as time goes by, just to simulate kind of the momentum they had as the Germans launched the attack and then lost it as time went by. The game itself, time frame, is December 16th through December 25th. So it covers the German offensive primarily. You're not really seeing the Allied counterattack. You're seeing the primary, the dramatic beginning of the Battle of the Bulge and beginning and maybe middle of it. Let me see. The holdfast system, like I said, uses these resource points. Resource points are what you use to activate units, to refit units, and to conduct combat. I'll go into all that in depth here in just a little bit. So the review will be, or this video I should say, will follow the standard formula that I've been doing for a little while now. So this is the introduction part. I'm going to do an overview, which is where I kind of describe each of the parts of the game. I'll do a review where I talk about my pros and cons, and then I'll give you guys my final thoughts. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. All right, we'll talk about the counters quick, the actual combat units. I position the camera here because you can actually, if you look at the map board here, you can actually see an explanation of how the step system works. You can see a blown up example of a counter, the size, unit steps, unit ID, type, core army, and then the numbers in the bottom, what they mean. But I'll also explain it, but you can kind of refer to that as I'm going along here in case I do a poor job of explaining it. So it is pretty standard. You're using NATO symbols, infantry, armored. You're going to see airborne. You're going to see other symbols as well. The three important numbers on the bottom here are going to be the DRC, SP, and MP. What that is the dice rolled in combat, the strength points, and then the movement points. When you're spending the resource points, you can do a couple different things with the resource points. Like I said before, the resource points are kind of the driver of the system. Each turn, you're going to have a certain amount of resource points to spend and keep track of them on a resource point track. You'll be able to spend them to activate units. Generally, each unit is going to be 1 resource point to activate. You can then go ahead and move it, or you can conduct a combat. Although you don't activate a single unit to combat, you actually activate, basically spend resource point or points to choose a hex to fight at. There's a little more depth to the system, but basically that's the basics of it. Pretty simple. Each of the units here going to have a number for the dice rolled in combat. The first number, DRC. The second one's a strength point. That can throw you off a little bit. It did when I first started. Basically, what that means is the strength point, the SP, right, the middle number, tells you how many steps there are, basically how many steps a unit has. It's also listed in the top left. So, for instance, in this German armored unit, you can see it's taken 1 hit. See, it's 2 out of 3. It has a strength of 2, 6 movement points, and 4. It'll roll 4 dice in combat. And it has that stripe across it, common in a lot of games, to indicate that it has been reduced. If you go to the front side, you can see up top here, 3 out of 3. So this is full strength at this point. 4, 3, 6. See, notice how the middle number, 3, matches 3 for 3. Here, 2. So you know that it only has 2 strength points left. In the case of this game, it's almost like those are hit points, right? Because once those are reduced to 0, no steps left, the unit's going to be removed from the map. Movement is standard. You know, if you have a terrain effects chart, you can guys kind of see the bit up here. Units give off zone of control. You're going to have to cost 3 MP. That does replace the terrain cost. That is something that's important. So if you're moving adjacent to a unit, say I'm moving this armor adjacent to this allied infantry and it's projecting a zone of control, you may think, well, I'm moving into, I have to pay for Wizard of Road hex, or maybe if I was right here and I wanted to move here, I have to pay for the cost of moving into a forest, which is 2 movement points. But then you enter a zone of control that adds 3. It doesn't add 3, it just costs 3. So you basically ignore the forest, ignore the road, whatever, and it would cost you 3 to move in. Yeah, and then dice roll in combat. We will cover combat here in a second. So I don't want to go too much into that, but basically that number may or may not change as a unit is reduced in its strength points. But that is going to be the amount of dice you are going to roll. Let's go ahead and look at the dice. You can see the dice here. It comes with these custom dice, and in my unboxing, I embarrassingly, is it embarrassing? I can't say embarrassingly. Totally forgot what these were, and I was like, what are these symbols on? Okay, obviously infantry and armor, the NATO symbols. So when you're conducting combat, you're going to roll, and there's multiple factors to it. I don't need to go into in depth. You can learn the game if you're interested. You can download the rulebook from Worthington Games website as well. But basically, depending on you're going to look at the amount of dice here. You're going to look at, you're going to look at the amount of dice DRC number for each of the units that are involved in an attack. You're then going to look at the terrain, how that modifies your number of dice. You're going to figure out how many you're supposed to roll, and go ahead and roll them. And then depending on the symbols, in a case where you're attacking, say, this armor, it's allied armor here, infantry symbol is not going to hit it at all. If you roll an armor symbol, it has to hit an armor unit. So say there happened to be, if they were defending and they rolled against me. So because the 10 defender gets to roll 2, so he has 2, he gets to roll his 2. Say he rolls an armor. Even though I have these 2 infantry and normally the defender gets to assign hits, he would actually get to go ahead and it'd have to go on my armor unit and it would damage him first. So that is how the dice work with combat. Kind of how combat works as well, but we'll go a little bit more depth in a second. Let's go ahead and move it up and take a look at the map. All right, so with the map, and you guys saw it a little bit earlier, you saw it in my unboxing. It's a nice, good map here. You have all the way from, you have the Siegfried line. You can see the red arrows showing where the Siegfried line is. The Germans are attacking westward. You're seeing the road network here. You're seeing different towns. There's Bastogne. You're seeing victory point numbers on here. And I'll get to that in a second when I talk about the how victory, winning, losing works. Let me see here. I want to make sure I cover everything. The terrain, like I said, there's a terrain effect chart over here. There's also one within the rulebook as well, but I love the fact that it's actually on the board here. That's super easy. I like the fact that all this is on the board. Terrain is very simple. You can see there's not a whole lot of confusion when you're moving around. You're going to see what's forest, does a road connect, where the towns are, where the rough terrain is, etc. You're not going to have any problems differentiating the terrain when you're going ahead and moving your units and conducting combat. Speaking of the resource point system, I wanted to cover that a little bit more. So like I said, depending on the turn, so for instance, we're looking at the allied turn track. You can see it starts first turn, 6 RPs, 8 RPs, 12 RPs, and it's going up. The Germans is going to start at 20 RPs and then slowly ramp down. These RPs are spent to take different actions. It's written on the board over here. Sorry, I didn't get it on the board here. But basically, super simple. You have all your RPs, and for every 1 RP, you can activate 1 unit for movement. If you are attacking a hex, remember you don't activate 1 unit for attacking, you attack a hex, you would spend either 1 RP if every attacking unit is part of the same army or corps. If it was different, so say the Germans are attacking this allied hex right here, and you can see we have 2 different corps, right? You have the 7th Army, and then you have the 5th Panzer Army. you would go ahead and have to spend 2 RPs to use all 3 units. I mean, you can spend just 1 RP, you'd only get to use either these or this one here. You also can spend, so at the beginning of a turn, you can spend 1 SP to refit an infantry. So you go ahead, simple as long as they're in supply. You go ahead and flip them over. And you can spend 2 RPs, to resupply an armored unit. Now let's talk about some of the support chits. The Allies and Germans each have different types of support. So for the Allies, you're looking primarily at Allied air, and then eventually they will have, where did that guy go? The patent counter comes in December 22nd. But what you do here, so you have the different types of support units. You can use them when you're activating units, depending if it's one of these 2 leaders, or if it's something like the artillery or the Allied air, you can use them in combat. The number here, the 2, is just the DRC, dice rolled in combat. So you go ahead and add 2. Artillery would add 1. You know, if you have Patton along for the ride there, he adds 1 die and 1 movement point to that unit. And then also the German leader as well, 1 die, 1 movement point. So it just adds a little bit of extra tactical depth of deciding, when and where you want to use your artillery, your Allied air, etc. And then keep in mind, if you notice on the turn track here, December 19th, it becomes overcast. You have to remove the German artillery. The German artillery no longer in a position to support the German advance at that point. You're also going to possibly see effects to the Allied air if you use the optional weather rules. All right, now just to show you guys a quick example of combat, a very simple one. We are the Germans, and we are attacking. We have our 2 5th Panzer Army infantry units here, and we are attacking the 7th Corps American mechanized here. What we have is, we have a 3 strength, 2 strength, remember DRC, so not strength points. That's the second number. So the first number we're looking at for the Germans, and we will calculate the Allies as well, but we'll hang on a moment for that. I like to do that last. So what we have, say we're declaring our attacks, we're spend 1 resource point to attack this hex. Both are adjacent, so they're able to attack. We have, looks like 3 and 2. And then what you do is you go ahead and look at any of the terrain that may modify the amount of dice that are available. This American unit he's on a road. That doesn't matter for combat, but he is in a forest. That is -1 die per attacking unit. So his 3 becomes a 2, and his 2 becomes a 1. So now it's a total of 3 dice instead of 5. Now you can do things like, hey, I want to commit my artillery, assuming it's available, no extra cost, but you only have 1 artillery marker for each of your army, each of your corps. So you can say, okay, I want to do that, and then I would give you 1 extra die to roll. Now what you're looking at this point, we have 4 dice. You're going to go ahead and roll. And what you're hoping for, which did not get, is in this case, you'd be hoping for the armor symbol. We only got 1 infantry symbol here. So if we'd been fighting an infantry unit, it would have got a hit. Because we did not roll any armor units, there's no hits on him. Now the defender gets to hit back. They don't suffer any terrain modifiers. So he has a 2 to his DRC. So he'd go ahead and roll 2 dice. Nothing there. And 1 armor in this case, let's just say. If he had hit an armor, even though it's an armor, we only have attacking with 2 infantry. An armor hits anything, but it takes, so infantry hits infantry, an armor hits armor or infantry, but it would be applied to, an attacking armor first. In this case, there are no armor, it's just infantry, so it's only going to be those. That is a pretty simple example of combat, but the combat is not really complicated in the game, so that alone is going to give you a good idea of how it works. All right, let's talk about victory conditions. We're looking at most of the map area here. You see the Germans, when they come in from the east, right, they're moving west. They're pushing the Allies back. You have Bastogne here. And you have the River Meuse. This is the big one. So, Germans have a couple ways to win or a couple ways to get close to victory. There's a sudden death victory for them if they're able to exit an in-supply armored unit with at least 2 strength out of one of these. Basically, if they cross, northwest here, cross the River Meuse, if they can cross over and exit the map at one of these 4 spots, Germans win automatically. It's pretty difficult to do, I'll tell you that, but it is one way they can win automatically. Another way for them to win, or kind of the way the game ends, is when you make it through all the turns, you go ahead and count up the victory points for the different towns that have a number listed. You can see on some of them here. Bastogne has a 2. You go ahead and add up those numbers. You have control markers for the Germans when they take a town. Otherwise, it's assumed to be in Allied control. Whoever has the most, or I shouldn't say whoever has the most. It's actually, I'm sorry, it's not whoever has the most. It's the Germans. There's a scale that says, hey, whether it's, German victory, draw, German defeat. So there was gradual, victory levels, besides the fact that there was the sudden death victory for marching units off the map. Allied armor anyway, or not Allied armor, excuse me, German armor units. Whew, jeez. All right, I think that covers the overview of the game. You guys should have a pretty good idea of how the game works. Let me go ahead and jump into my review. Do our cons first, we'll do our pros, and then we'll do my final thoughts. All right, this is my review thoughts here. First off, we'll do our cons. Let's talk about the things I didn't like or maybe thought could have been done a little better. Then we'll go into the things I really enjoyed. For cons, there's a couple things. The hex numbers themselves on the map are really hard to read when you are... Especially, I'm sure on camera, you guys can't see them at all. Standing here, I can see the ones in clear terrain, but any of the other ones, I can't read at all. I have pretty good eyesight, actually. They're hard to read. Now, the nice thing is it only really matters in setup, which I got out the cards here. We'll talk about those in a minute. But it's just something to be aware of. Second con is the map itself. From a distance, it can be a little hard to read sometimes. I know that I put these cards on here, which maybe I shouldn't have done that yet. I wanted to show them off, and I will in a second here. So sorry about that. Let me kind of move them. I think when you're really looking at it from a distance and you start putting some counters on, especially the Allied counters with their green, they blend in a little bit with the rough hex and then the forest. But I'll tell you, the reality is once you're actually like sitting, it's almost like you set it up, and you're kind of looking at it, and everything's over here. You're like, uh-oh, this is a little hard to read. Once you're sitting at the table, and as soon as you kind of start looking at this, really digging in, looking, pushing counters around, everything starts standing out really well. It's hard to tell how that looks on camera. It's one of those things that's a little maybe subjective. It's subjective anyway. But for me, struggled a little bit setting it up. Once I had everything set up and I was playing, not a problem whatsoever. But just something to be aware of. And last, the dice. I think that they may wear over time. I think I saw someone said they had dice face wear. Now, they must have played a lot more than me. I've been playing actually quite a bit over the last week when I could anyway. But the dice, it's not a, I don't even know what the process was. It's not an etched in. It's almost like I think it's like painted on. I know it's really a problem. I'm sure you can't see it on the camera. But basically, I could see where that would wear off, possibly over time. I think you'd scrape it off, but I'm not, lunatic. I'm not going to do that to my dice. But just, something to be aware of, may wear off. They're pretty simple. You're looking for, there's one armor and then one infantry symbol on each dice. So like if they started wearing them, you could just roll d6s and say, the armor is a 6, infantry is a 5, everything else is blank. But they're cool dice as is, so I'd hate to see them wear off. But just, again, one more thing to be aware of. That's it for my cons, really. Let's go ahead and jump into my pros. First one, the large counters. Super readable from any distance. I think that's pretty obvious as I think looking at my camera here, I can see that even from up here, which you can see the whole map, you can read these. That's one problem with hex and counter games. People a lot of times hey, Wayne, do a playthrough. Yeah, it's hard because I have to keep moving the camera constantly, because if I try to leave the camera up there and I'm moving stuff around, you guys can't see them if they're small counters. These bad boys, you can see them from space. You can read them. Very easy to read, because they are large counters, large, thick counters, very nice. I love that. It takes aspect of the fact that the hold fast system came from block games, and they almost feel like these are just the 2D blocks, right? It's just the counters here, but it's got that big feel, big hefty feel, and very readable from a distance. Second is combat. Combat is simple, but the emphasis on the terrain and the support markers gives a good tactical depth. So you guys saw me do the combat example. It took me 30 seconds. Probably took me twice as long to explain than it really should have taken. But the nice thing is because you have those, you have those air markers, allied air, you have artillery, you have leaders, and you get to choose when to use all those. So in addition, the terrain, right? Depending as a defender, which primarily is the allies, right? Because they're kind of pulling back, defending, trying to hold back the Germans. You get to choose, wait, do I defend at the bridges? Do I defend at the bridgeheads? Do I defend in towns? Because when you're defending in a town, you actually get an additional die when you're rolling against the attackers, which is pretty nice. You can, let me see here. You can just like you know, focus on rough terrain, try to use your zone of control to interdict the enemy, slow them down, etc., etc. The combat, although simple, has a lot of tactical depth, which I really appreciate in a game like this, which means you're playing it fast, you're moving your units around quickly. You know, everything's flowing very well because it's 7 pages of rules. I don't know if I mentioned that or not. It's about 7 pages of rules. Everything plays really quick, but there's some depth there, some tactics that keeps you interested. So, talking about the rules, it's solitaire friendly. The basic rules are solitaire friendly. I play all my games solo, no problem with it whatsoever. It is also going to be 2-player friendly, I imagine. I haven't played it that way, but because there's the fog of war, the hidden units, and you have counters. You have these hidden unit counters you can put on top of your units. There's also German variable objectives, which I don't have them out here right now, but I looked at them in the unboxing, my recon. That just gives you kind of the different objectives that the Germans may be doing that you, as you know, some of you are playing 2-player and you know someone else playing the Allies, you're not going to know what the Germans are really up to. Something I thought was really cool. And then the map encounters, fantastic quality, nice amount of map, lays very flat. I think I laid it out and then I put up like some couple books on it the next day. I mean, it was basically flat enough to play on anyway, but I'm kind of a perfectionist sometimes. I wanted it like super flat. Put a couple books on overnight the next day. Perfect. I haven't had anything on it since other than counters because I've been playing the game. Counters themselves, you already know, large counters, easy print, easy to read. I think there's 1 or 2 minor errata. There's one of these allied units. We flip it over. It looks like it's got a different, oh, there we go. So infantry here, flip it over. Suddenly it's, you know, it's like, what happened there? So it's still infantry. That's just a printer mistake, but just 1 or 2 things like that. Nothing major whatsoever. No big errata that I've seen. The last thing I wanted to mention, this is what I had these on the map for, is these order of battle sheets. I love these. Let me tell you. For X and counter games, trying to set up all the counters can be a pain. Look at these bad boys. So I have my map set up, and on either side I have one of these. And you have, you know, the complete Allied order of battle, the German order of battle. You can see it has all the starting units, and then each turn's reinforcements. You set them up. You're going to have your main units. You're going to have, you know, the extra step counters, because we talk about, you know, you'll have units where, for example, this is 2 out of 4, right? So that means there's another counter on the board right now that is a 4 and a 3. Here's the 2 and 1. Anyway, you have a place for them. They're organized. You can tell exactly where they are. Each turn comes, you go ahead and you know where to put them. It has the location where they either start or where they enter the map. Love having these cards, these order battle cards. Great play aid, and really glad they came with the game. Let's go ahead. I believe that's everything to cover, my pros and cons. Let's go ahead and dive into my final thoughts. All right, everyone. Couldn't tell from my all the good things I was talking about. I really enjoy this one. This is an excellent one-map treatment of the Battle of the Bulge. Simple rules, very playable, big hexes, big counters. You know, it fits everything on one map. The map itself is set up well. It has a train effects chart. It has, you know, you can see how the units are broken up, out of supply effects, resource point chart, everything you need. Gameplay is great. Simple rules, but there's some tactical depth there. If you're looking for a super in-depth Bulge game, maybe this isn't it. You know, maybe this is the one where, you know, you get, you know, I want to say Time for Trumpets, because isn't that like 7 maps or 12 maps or something like that? The one from GMT. Clearly, this is the opposite end of the spectrum, right? This is where, hey, I want to play Battle of the Bulge. I want to play, you know, the full map. You know, something like Celis from Revolution Games. Great game. A little more limited in scope. This one's a little bigger than that. And literally, everything's bigger. But also bigger area, you know, more units, etc. While still not being overwhelming. Often when you see these full battles, right, like the whole Battle of the Bulge, you're looking at maybe a multi-mapper, maybe 2 maps at a minimum. It's really nice to see a 1-mapper with such fantastic component quality. This is Worthington. All their games have fantastic component quality, but I'm not going to stop mentioning it because I think it is worth mentioning, and it's a credit to them. We should mention the, you know, the mounted map, the big counters, punch out easy, look good on the map, etc., etc. So really enjoy this one. I can definitely recommend it to anyone who, whether you want, I mean, you probably have a Bulge game already, but maybe you don't. Maybe you're like, oh, I don't know, there's so many. People are recommending some of these older ones or these big multi-mappers. I'm a 1-map guy, like one of the, you know, 22 by 34, whatever it is, inch map, and smaller. This one, full-size map like that, perfectly does the job. There's some additional Bulge games out there that have just come out recently and are coming out in the future we're going to take a look at. But for now, when you're looking on the simpler end, the lighter end, let's call it, right? So you have heavier games, you have medium weight games, you have lighter games. Definitely a lighter weight game. But I believe that unless you're set on depth, right? You're set on, I want 30 pages of rules. I want down to the man type fighting, right? Okay, maybe this isn't for you then. And that's fair. Not against the game, nothing against you. It's not for you. But if you want something very playable, large game, large components, but very playable, this would be one worth checking out. So, Battle of the Bulge 1944, signed by Dan Fournie, published by Worthington. Thank you guys who made it this far. You know the deal. Subscribe, why don't you? I mean, come on, you've already watched this whole thing. Hopefully you've watched it anyway. If you watch it, you're already a subscriber. I really appreciate it. Comment below then. Let me know what you like, didn't like, other games to check. I've got a big pile of games to look at, and it's a good problem to have, right? We're a great time right now in wargaming. We got a lot of games, and I'm excited to check out all of them. So, but please comment below. Let me know what you think. Until next time, guys. Later.